Hey, welcome back everyone to the Progressive Brothers Podcast. This is episode 82. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Hey, welcome back everyone. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and peace to everybody in the chat.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcasts. So today's topic is Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, who passed away at the age of 84. And this is a remarkable individual, considering to be of the Black American 20th century and into the 21st century, as breaking many glass ceilings that many others could not have done prior to him. And in this, in his resume, his portfolio, he will be remembered as maybe a lion, a general, a statesman, more or less. And what Colin Powell has done over the last the last 2 decades may be questionable, and it seems like when it comes to Black public figures, it always seems that they highlight the negative and not the positive first. And so, Renaissance Man, what are some of the positives that we can actually highlight of Colin Powell?
Oh man, I think you hit it on the head, Mike, when you said statesman. To me, that term is just it's a pretty rare term that you can really designate to someone. I mean, truth be told, in my lifetime, the only person that even comes to mind as a statesman is John McCain, obviously who passed a couple years back. And maybe, and I don't even know if he would fall in this category or not, maybe like a David Petraeus, and that's a big maybe. Statesmen you normally think of as first or at some point served in the military, and then having a long life in public service, which Colin Powell definitely did. Another positive, he won 2 Presidential Medals of Freedom, as well as a Congressional Gold Medal and a Presidential Citizens Medal. So very very well accomplished in the civilian awards. He had his own doctrine, the Power Doctrine, which is in my opinion, one of the guiding principles. I think we've gotten away from it, but I'll hit on that a little bit later, of some of the key points of the doctrine and just the importance of that. I think he was definitely a trailblazer. Obviously, I believe the first Black Joint Chiefs of Staff in this country, as well as I think really could have been the first Black president if he wanted to. Really someone who I think really could have had the respect of someone on the right, and I think could have, because of his leadership and personality and accomplishments, I think could have won people over, on the Democratic side of the house. I definitely see him as one of the few, Black Republicans that could have definitely enjoyed broad-based Black support across the board. Those are just some of the things that come to mind. For me personally, his book on leadership was one of the first books I really studied on leadership, and it has had some really, really great principles in there as well too. So I mean, definitely, I think, like I said, I think just someone who was well accomplished, and I think just from looking at some of the posts that I've seen, someone who was respected across all racial lines, and even so, you could even argue somewhat generational lines as well too.
Now, you say he could have ran for president, but in which administration would he have ran?
I heard talk of him running for president in the, obviously people, I think, his most prominent times were really, I think, the Bush years, when he was Joint Chiefs of Staff. I don't know if he would have had the clout, honestly, just because I'm too young to remember, his his political, political prowess in the 90s. But, I think he very well, if he wanted to, could have either could have ran in 2000, in the primary, or, maybe 2008, the one black guy that sort of, tarnishes his tremendous resume, and to no fault of his own, I don't think is the Iraq War and the lead up to it. But I mean, he was going off of intel from the intelligence community. He, later, once he found out that information was not as accurate as they portrayed it to him, he was very much someone who was vocal in expressing his displeasure for the war, as well as I think I've even read that even prior to, I think there were some concerns even with the intel that he was receiving, but I think for solidarity in the administration, he kind of kept that those criticisms behind closed doors. So I think him being in the Bush administration, I think they really took advantage of his prestige and the respect and trust he had with the international community to further their own agenda. So I don't know if he could have maybe came back from that right after 2018. But maybe 2016, you could have had someone who had some of that military service that really could have stood up to Trump, but Trump also attracted the wild element. So some of those that time period, either right before Bush 2 or post Bush 2.
Interesting. Now, in regards to him being a Republican, which is something that certain people on the right will hold up, they'll say, "Oh, well, he was one of ours. He was a Republican, and he was this huge conservative, but he was a different type of conservative. He was a black conservative, whereas the people who want to uphold his legacy identify him as a conservative who was black. The fact that he supported Obama, he endorsed Obama, not once but twice, and actually endorsed Biden and spoke out against the party, speaks volumes about who he was and where he stood on the political scope. And so I find it interesting that some people will try to make it seem like he was a conservative. No, but he was a black conservative. His upbringing kind of tells you, throughout the years, he did not go to a D1 school. He went to a city university, I think in New York. I think it was CUNY. So when you think about how he grew up no different than your average working class black family. And so he didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth like some conservatives would like to hear. But he's a good talking point from this. He's an immigrant. He's a family of immigrants that came from Jamaica. They worked really hard. They like that sob story of foreigners coming here and groveling at their, and working hard and moving up the ladder. But in reality, they had to work hard because he grew up at a time of segregation where Jim Crow was the rule of the law. And before he died, and I think in his NAACP speech, he lamented about the progressivism of the U.S. military at the time when he enlisted. He was one of the first to enlist with the desegregation of the military itself. And so he harps on progressive ideals, starting with the military and then trickling down throughout society as time moved on through the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of the 60s and furthermore. And so some of these conservatives who want to hold on to the idea that Colin Powell was just a conservative, no, he was a black conservative in identity. He actually left the Republican Party. I can't remember the exact time period, but you could argue he was one of the first
Republicans that really became critical of where the party was going. Not only just racially, but I think in other terms as well. You know, I talked about the Power Doctrine, which I'll go ahead and go into that now real quick because I think it ties in. You know, the Power Doctrine essentially states that you have 8 criteria that need to be answered affirmatively before military action is taken by the United States. The 8 criteria are: is it a vital national security interest threatened? Do we have a clear, obtainable objective? Have the risk and cost been fully and frankly analyzed? Have all other nonviolent policy measures been fully exhausted? Is there a plausible exit strategy to avoid endless entanglement? Have the consequences of our actions been fully considered? Is the action supported by the American people? And do we have genuine broad international support? To me, that really sort of, you know, that doctrine really goes back to what you could argue that, you know, some libertarians and even some liberals that say that, you know, the United States has gotten away from as far as like war powers and how the U.S. goes about, you know, initiating war. You know, at one point he said that, you know, the nation should essentially exhaust all political, economic, and diplomatic means. And those attempts need to be futile before the nation should resort to military force. And then if you do resort to military force, he does believe in basically utilizing all your resources to ensure basically that the conflict ends as quickly as possible, so you minimize casualties and the weaker force basically capitulates and surrenders. So you basically no long drawn out war. You know, if you have to go to war, it's a last resort, and you know, end it as soon as possible to minimize casualties and damage. And to me, I think, you know, that you really see a lot of, if you look at true conservatism and principles, you see a lot of that in there where you know, restraint as far as using force, you know, making war as sort of a last priority, even like I said, even some liberal principles as well too in that regard too. But you see how America has gotten away from that. So I think when you start talking about, you know, him leaving the party, there's the racial element there, but then I think also there's just the neocon element that I'm sure that, you know, based on, you know, his dealings with the Iraq War, that, you know, he was not very fond of as well too. So there were various things in the party that he found highly problematic, and I think that is what led him to endorse Obama both in 2008 as well as 2012, and endorse Biden, and I believe Hillary Clinton as well too. Like I said, leave the party. Just the general trend of where the party was going, you know. And I know he spoke out against you know, tax policy. You know, Republicans were very hard on suggesting that, you know, Obama was a Marxist or, you know, a communist because he wanted to raise taxes, and, you know, he was very critical of that rhetoric of, you know, hey, someone who's suggesting that, you know, the tax rate needs to be adjusted for, you know, adequate funding of things like our military and domestic programs, suggesting that person is a Marxist or, you know, any other sort of incendiary type of term, just it is not good faith, and it's not good for the direction of the party. So I see overall, not just on race, but on just issues surrounding conservatism in general and the well-being of the country, where he was willing to really stand up for his principles and call out the party.
He would have to be considered a center-right person if he had a political compass, right?
Yes.
And so he identified that the former governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, was going to be problematic for the party, and he was right in his assertion that Sarah Palin up to Marjorie Taylor Greene today, Marjorie Taylor Greene is today what Sarah Palin was in 2008. That these types of people are problematic to the party, and he needed to divorce himself away from that part of the party. And he got a lot of flack for it, but there was nothing you can do about a general, one of the two in American history to receive two presidential, what do you call it? The Presidential Medal of Freedom. And so when people in black spaces who claim to be conservative try to latch onto him, they don't realize that his background in conservative politics is radically different than what their perception of what conservatism is. And so he had to move away from the party, from the center to the left rather than the center to the right, primarily because the center to the right was so toxic that it was impossible to actually get anything accomplished on that side. And so if he had to be reincarnated, he would probably be more of a modern day Democrat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that he sort of embodies as well too, more if you look at it for black men, is you talked about his background, growing up in New York, being the children of immigrants. He's really sort of speaks to the embodiment of how the military has been a source of upward mobility for black men. If you look at the World War II, a lot of the black soldiers who came back from fighting in World War II, they then proceeded to agitate for civil rights, form self-defense units like the Deacons for Defense and Justice, utilizing their military training to defend black communities, and that's a part of history that I don't think people really sort of make the connection to at times, is how much having that military service and military background was very vital in organizing the community and pushing for full rights, especially if you've experienced it internationally. But then B, also, once again, it being a source of upper mobility, where someone like Colin Powell can, come out of New York City, like you said, parents of immigrants, work his way up the ranks, become a 4-star general, retire, become the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and, become just a very high-ranking and very well-respected military official. Like I said, have his own military doctrine and be extremely influential in the space of setting foreign policy, during at his time the most powerful country in the world. So I think we have to look at it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think his accomplishments will leave a legacy that even maybe Obama may not be able to match, despite the fact that he wasn't the president. I think he and Obama were more alike than not, but he probably went further because I think he sacrificed more of his social and political capital than Obama may have, even to this day. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is maybe somebody in the military could perhaps rename one of the bases that's named after a Confederate general after Colin Powell. I think that's highly probable. I also think it's highly probable that the next generation military battle tank will be named after Powell, much like the Abrams is. I also think that there will be some kind of monument left behind for Powell at some point. They already renamed the school after him way before he even died. So that shows you how much immense social capital and political capital he had. Those are my last thoughts right now.
Oh man, I definitely agree. Everything from like a foreign or a diplomatic service school, or like one of the war academies, something like that.
He was against that before he died.
Oh really? He did not want anything to be named after him, really?
He didn't want that to be named after him. I think the school that he has in that they named after him in City University of New York, I think that was what he wanted on diplomacy.
Okay. No, I definitely think, that's an option. Like you said, some sort of monument, as well as, like you said, a military installation, and I think any, like I said, I go back to it. I can't think of anyone else who, outside of McCain, like I said, who really embodies statesmen besides him and Colin Powell. So I don't know if it's like, when they start talking about things like, the currency, there's a lot of pushback when they wanted to put someone like Harriet Tubman, on the $20 bill. Is he someone that, gets on a coin or something like that at some point, because he has that broad public service and that military background. And to me, he's just one of those figures that I don't really see anything that's really too controversial in the sense, because I think he has that broad appeal that people can rally around in the sense of, you have someone who, the Black community can rally around just because of his trailblazing accomplishments. But then someone, because of his military service and his acumen there, the greater American populace has to recognize that as well too. So I think really anything that we can come up with that we think would be great in honoring what he stood for, I think will be a no-brainer as far as cementing his legacy and just being appreciative of the contributions he gave to American society, as well as his tremendous leadership skills. I encourage people, if you haven't, just go type on YouTube and look up some of his speeches where he talks about things like leadership, or he has a book out that came out several years back about leadership principles. I encourage people to look into those things as well, because just a lot you can learn from, and like I said, just very much a trailblazer in his own right, who in my opinion will be sadly missed, especially in the current political climate we have right now.
Definitely. Like, share, and subscribe. Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast.